Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining me in the video today. Today I have a really special instrument to talk about. This is my 1948 Buffet bass clarinet. But unlike your standard bass clarinet in the key of B flat, this instrument is pitched a whole tone higher in the key of C. Now C bass clarinets on their own are quite rare, but this instrument has a few other cool features that I just haven't seen on any other instrument. First of all, you may notice that this instrument actually has bone system keywork just like a modern bass clarinet. Now, most of the bass clarinets you see out there are simple system instruments and were made in the 19th century. But another special feature of this instrument is that it was made in 1948, making it the most recent example of a C bass clarinet we know of. So this is a very rare instrument to have, and I'm really excited to talk more about this instrument, how I got it, and some of the unusual features of this instrument. So without further ado, let's get started. So how did I get my hands on such a rare and unusual instrument? Well, a few years ago, I was browsing Facebook and I happened to see that Reed & Squeak had a very unusual bass clarinet for sale. They had an Adler bone system bass clarinet in the key of C. So similar to this, but it had a smaller bore. It had an open tone hole for the left-hand first finger, which was fairly common on bass clarinets from the late 19th century. And it was also missing the sliver key for the right hand. But still, a bone system bass clarinet in key of C is something that I didn't really think existed at the time. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get that instrument, but it did make me curious. And I was browsing eBay France one day, and I happened to see this bass clarinet for sale. Now, it wasn't listed as a C bass clarinet, it was just listed as a Buffet bass clarinet. But there were some unusual features that tipped me off that this was something special. Most noticeably, I was looking at the lower joint, and I noticed that the first two pad cups were very close together. So if I grab my B flat bass clarinet for comparison, we'll see that the pad cups are quite far apart. So upon seeing that, I knew that there was something unusual about this instrument, and most likely it was pitched higher than your standard B flat bass clarinet. Now, that could potentially mean that it was like a high pitch instrument or something, so I had to be careful. I thought about it for a few days, and eventually I decided to place a bid, and I won the auction for a very reasonable price. And a few weeks later, I received this instrument in the mail. Now, the first thing I did was I popped on a bass clarinet mouthpiece, and to my surprise, it was pitched in the key of C, and not only that, it was pitched to around 440 or 442, depending on how far you pulled out the mouthpiece. So I definitely lucked out on getting this instrument. After receiving the instrument in the mail, the next step, of course, was to overhaul it and get it into good playing condition. Now, given the historical significance of this instrument being the most recent example of a C bass clarinet that we know of, I needed to be really careful with this overhaul. So my goal was to be as historically accurate to the time period that this instrument was made as possible, and to make as few permanent modifications to the instrument as possible. For the overall, I used tan Pisoni leather pads, as those were the closest match I could find to what was originally on the instrument, and natural key corks, because that's what would have been used at the time. Although in more modern instruments, I tend to use more modern materials like synthetic felt, alter suede, and Teflon. Now, despite this, the instrument came out really good. As you can hear, it sounds nice and full throughout the range, and the intonation is actually quite good, even in line with a lot of modern professional bass clarinets. So overall, I'm very happy with how this instrument plays. So now I'd like to talk about the design of this instrument. And fortunately, I have a really good point of comparison. So this is a 1947 Buffet bass clarinet that's less than 100 serial numbers from this instrument. So this should give us a really good idea of the differences in general between a B flat and C bass clarinet. So like the B flat bass clarinet, this instrument uses a standard B flat bass clarinet mouthpiece, a lot like how a C soprano clarinet uses a standard B flat mouthpiece. And interestingly enough, you would expect the bore of this instrument to be a bit smaller than the B flat, but actually the opposite is true. The bore is a bit bigger. So at the middle joint, the bore is 23.5 millimeters, and at the neck, it's 24 millimeters. Now on that instrument, it is 23.3 at the middle and 23.8 at the neck. So about 0.2 millimeters smaller overall. Interestingly enough, this bass clarinet actually has the same bore dimensions as the modern Buffet 1193 Prestige bass clarinet. I'm not exactly sure if that was a coincidence, or maybe the two instruments were designed based off the same instrument. It's not really clear, but it's just something interesting to note. Now, looking at the keywork of the instrument, as previously mentioned, it is a standard bone system, with the main exception being, you'll notice that it actually has two register vents. So this is a system that was common on bass clarinets in the early 20th century. So just like how a modern professional bass clarinet has a fully automatic double register vent mechanism, this instrument also has 2 register vents, but you have to switch between the 2 register keys to switch between those 2 vents. So when you play a B through about an E flat, you'll use the first vent, and when you go higher than that, you'll use the second vent. And of course, when you're playing throat B flat, it would be the first vent as well, sort of just like your standard pincher key, just like you would do on a standard B flat clarinet. Now, when I pick up the B flat bass clarinet, even though this instrument is actually a bit older than this bass clarinet, it does have a fully automatic double register vent mechanism. So this will automatically switch when you lift your right hand third finger. So it's kind of unusual that this older instrument from the same manufacturer has a more advanced mechanism than that bass clarinet. But I suspect that was because this instrument was actually probably based off of an earlier instrument. I doubt Buffet really did all the design work when they designed this instrument. I'm assuming they probably just copied it off an earlier instrument. So along those lines, you would expect most modern bass clarinets to go either to low E flat or to low C. This instrument only goes to low E, so you can see there's no 5th pinky key here. Although I guess you can make the argument that there's probably really no need to go lower than E because there's not really any literature that would need it anyway. But it's something you tend to see a lot on bass clarinets anyway, so it's just noteworthy that it's missing on this instrument. Other than that, obviously it doesn't have a left hand A flat E flat key, although again, this Buffet actually does, so unusual to see. And the neck does not have a tuning slide, neither does this one from 1947. Other than that, it pretty much has everything you would expect on a bass clarinet. You know, it has an altissimo vent for the first finger, it has all plateau keys, although as I mentioned, some earlier C bass clarinets, even the Bohm system ones, had one single open tone hole for the first finger, and it does also have an extra vent, what's called a GD resonance vent. It just makes the note G in the lower register and D in the upper register a little bit clearer sounding. But yeah, other than that, it's built a lot like a standard modern bass clarinet. Now, to give you an idea of what this instrument sounds like across the range and the intonation, I'm going to be playing a chromatic scale, and I'll have a tuner here so you can check the intonation for yourself. Now, no clarinet is going to have perfect intonation, and this bass clarinet is certainly no exception. However, given that this is a bass clarinet from the 1940s, I'm really impressed with how good the intonation is. You would expect that a custom instrument like this might have poor intonation because the makers might not have as much experience building one, but actually it seems to be designed really well and the intonation is actually quite good. I didn't really notice any notes that were significantly off, and overall the instrument felt fairly even. So now let's compare the sound of this bass clarinet to a standard B flat bass clarinet. So I'm going to be playing a C scale on this instrument, and I'm going to play the same scale on the B flat bass clarinet. So exactly how rare are bass clarinets in the key of C? Well, let's look at another rare size of bass clarinet, the bass clarinet in A. So this is an instrument that was originally conceived of by Wagner in the middle of the 19th century, but became obsolete in the beginning of the 20th century, although there are modern examples that have been constructed. So as far as I can tell, there are at least 32 known instruments that were built at some point with Bohm system keywork. Most of these being made by Selmer, some made by Steve Fox, some by Buffet, and a few by other companies. So these instruments are definitely very rare. Now let's look at Bohm system bass clarinets in the key of C. Through all my research, I've only found 7 known instruments. 3 of those were made by Selmer, 3 by Buffet, and 1 by Adler. Now, interestingly enough, the 1921 Selmer catalog actually states that they offer C bass clarinets and that they were becoming very popular among musicians that didn't want to transpose. Yet, the fact that they only made 3 clearly shows that that actually wasn't the case. The other 2 Buffets that I was able to find were a bit older than my instrument. One appears to have been made around the 30s, and another one appears to have been made in the late 19th century and actually has an open tone hole for the left-hand first finger, like a lot of other 19th century bass clarinets. And then the last instrument was the Adler that I mentioned previously. So yeah, as far as I can tell, this might just be the rarest size of Boehm system bass clarinet, other than, of course, some of the weird one-off ones like my G bass clarinet. So it's definitely very unusual that I found this instrument, and I'm very lucky to have it. Thank you everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it.